Hi all, I have another very interesting game of Näcmetdinov to show you. This is played in the USSR Championship of 1957. So a lot of the big guns in chess were in this 1957 tournament, and Rashid got to play Boris Spassky in round 13. So Boris, of course, was to become a future world chess champion. Let's see what happened in this game. E4 from Rashid. Boris Spassky plays the Sicilian defense, and we have now knight c6 and now bishop b5. On chessgames.com, this variation is actually called the Sicilian defense. There's Näcmetdinov - Rosalimo attack. Yes, so maybe this is one of the influential games that Näcmetdinov is actually getting his name associated with this variation. We see g6. White castles, bishop g7, and now c3. So white's playing it as if it's a kind of royal of pairs, just aiming to construct a broad centre here. Knight f6, queen e2, black castles, e5. Now knight d5 is possible, as well as knight e8. They're both quite popular. Knight e8 was chosen here, and it's got some perks to it. The knight can come to c7 and support other things later. d4. So knight c7 with tempo on the bishop. White doesn't really want to lose that bishop. Bishop a4, c takes, and now d5. So the pawn structure here is pretty fixed. Black here is interested potentially in trying to weaken white on the light squares, if that's possible. The immediate concern for white is bishop g4 though, and that's addressed with h3 because that would be quite a nasty pin. Rook b8. We see the bishop dropping back, and now b6, and another perk of the bishop, rather than knight, sorry, on c7 is bishop a6. It's supporting bishop a6 here, and that's quite a sensitive diagonal. But Näcmetdinov doesn't try and address it. If he does, there's no point actually in bishop d3 because knight b4. So it looks a little bit unfortunate and sad that white is being weakened on the light squares. Bishop d2 is played, allowing bishop a3 but stopping at least knight b4. So we see bishop a6 and the light square bishops get exchanged off. It's not all bad news for white, for Näcmetdinov here. He has that bind in the sense of the extra space, this aggressive pawn chain. Can black undermine it though? Is it subject to undermining with f6 later? What about the c-file as well, the shared c-file? Who's going to be first on c-file? At the moment, two knights are occupying the c-file. Can white build up some pressure there? We see queen d7. And here, now, white allows actually knight b4 to be played because knight c3, leaving some protection of b4. So knight b4 with tempo is possible, and that's actually played. And now rook bc8. Okay, this knight's kicked back, and there's a possibility of knight a5 now to c4. This looks quite vulnerable. It stopped with b4. Knight e6, putting some pressure, extra pressure on d4. That has to be addressed. It's addressed with queen d3. So here, it seems as though white's got a nice bind on the position. And there's a little bit of pressure on d5. So this knight seems to be a little bit limited in scope. And Spassky plays maybe a bit too actively here. It seems quite logical to play f6, but there might be a downside now. This e-file could be dangerous for black, and particularly e7 if that pawn's left on e7. We see actually e takes, and a pawn is left on e7, so technically a backward pawn. You might think, hasn't black got enough piece activity here? It seems very active, a lot of pressure on d4. That has to be addressed. Knight e2. Bishop drops back. Rook ac1. Now, with black's piece activity, what actually has he achieved here? White could potentially just double rooks on the c-file in this position. We see a5, provoking white forward, b5. Is this knight really good on b8 though? we see now one pair of rooks coming off. And now knight f4. So the e-file is being cleared for pressure on e7 potentially. That still is a backward pawn potentially, which could be hit later. More pressure on d4 though, rook c4. It seems like an active aggressive move. It's parried down, knight takes e6. And now with tempo, rook e1, and for the first time now, e7, its pressure is starting to be felt. We see queen d6. Black is not immediately threatening anything, and it seems actually this is exploited now, this queen and knight here. White plays what seems to be quite a logical move, which furthers his dark square grip on the position. Can you see what white plays in this position? If I give you 5 seconds. Just g3, and white's looking quite good now with bishop f4 on the cards. Here, knight d7 is played. But now, bishop f4, and the queen hasn't got too many squares at all, goes to f6, dropping that e7 pawn. Yes, it's turning out to be quite a liability. To take with the bishop or the rook, well, Näcmetdinov actually takes with the rook here. And we see knight f6, and it seems as though, hold on a sec, the connection, the defense of e7 has been interrupted. And furthermore, doesn't it look as though if there's a rook retreat, that knight e4 looks aggressive for black? Well, actually that might not be possible, especially though after white's next move here, queen e2. It protects the rook. The rook's not going anywhere, it's still on the 7th rank, so things like queen e6 check look quite dangerous. Now, in this position, h6 was played, and with this move it seems Spassky resigned, in fact. Let's have a look though, just before we get into that. If knight e4, can you see what white could play here? Okay, there's rook takes e4 here because this is check. There's no check there. So yeah, Spassky's h6 seems to be in a difficult position. It's not the easiest of positions. Now, in this final position, why did Spassky resign? There is actually a very, very interesting tactical idea available for white using this rook on that 7th rank. And yeah, one of the more clinical moves is actually very, very interesting aesthetically. Can you see what white can actually play here? If I give you 5 seconds. Alright, given the move order is not important, I'm going to throw in the first move for you for free. Check and ask the same question here. What can white play in this position which taps into the strength of the rook on the 7th rank and white's position generally? So 5 seconds. There's a really a bone crushing move in this position available to white. So 5 seconds here to pause the video. What would you play with white? Test your tactical skills. Okay, this bishop takes h6. It undermines f6 a little bit, opens up that rook on the 7th. And the point here is after bishop takes h6, there's a really, really crushing move available to white here. Can you see? Five seconds. Knight e5, yeah, threatens knight g6, and there's no easy way of defending this position against that fork of queen and king. If queen g8, then f6 drops. That's just really horrible. It looks absolutely disastrous. For example, just something like this. For example, mating. So yeah, this position is absolutely crushing. There's no defense, it seems, available. No easy defense in this position. So yeah, it seems Spassky might have resigned because of this sort of idea in particular. Seems quite crushing, but White's position was good anyway. So congratulations to Näcmetdinov for taking out a very, very high profile player in this tournament. But he did suffer a few losses in the tournament overall. But at least, you know, he showed that he can play chess, aggressive chess, even against the very best in the USSR at the time. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.